beautiful Sabbath morning to thank you for us gathering together for this fellowship. We thank you for your word, and we ask for your presence and your guidance as we are about to feast from this word. Please be with us. Please help our minds be focused. Enlighten our minds with ideas from on high, so that we might understand the deep things about you, about your law, so that we might come to love your law. Thank you for everything in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Happy Sabbath, everyone.
Which notes?
We're just gonna finish up the notes we had for a while, and the laws of the Bible, and then we are going to start with another notes, which we hopefully are gonna finish also. If not, then it is what it is. We cannot. So, just a short recap of what we've done up to this point. We've done quite a lot of stuff. We have seen that the laws of nature and the laws of the Bible are actually the same laws, and we have seen that when we look at nature, we usually do not, for example, we see everything in nature, but we do not understand it. We do not understand so many things about how, for example, our human body works. We do not understand how the stars in heaven, they move, how the planets move, how the plants grow. But we appreciate this, but we do not understand it. And I say that in the same way, many people look at the Bible and say they look at the Bible, they see it's beautiful, just as you look at some flowers, it's beautiful, they read the Psalms and they say, oh, this gives me encouragement, or they read the epistles or whatever, stories from the Bible, and they're kind of, they admire the narrative that is there in the Bible. But this is not enough, because we have to not only look at something and admire it, we also have to understand it. And in order to understand it, I was saying that understanding is meaning, right? So what is the meaning or understanding of a word? You have to understand something. You go to a dictionary, and you go to a dictionary, you will find, for example, for this word, you will find several other words which are synonymous with this, or expressions, right? And you define this word through these other words. And I even said, if you look for this word, you will find these other words also. So it's all a circle. They all come full circle. They define each other, and you have everything. That's how language is structured. That's how we are able to, even though we don't know all the words of a language, we're able to still understand one another, because really we just have very few concepts, not very few, but not so many concepts, and for each concept you have so many words that can define that concept, and you can pick and choose whatever word fits you better, but nevertheless, for that concept you have these words, 20 words, and that concept you have 50 words, and there are so many expressions. So that's how language is structured. If we wouldn't, we wouldn't be able to have a language without this, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to have a dictionary, a language without a dictionary, because nobody would know what we mean when we say something, right? I mean, we don't know if. So what I wanted to say is that the structure of our language is actually based upon this, upon conflating the language into different concepts, and each concept has its own words that define one another, right? And I want to say this is actually line upon line, because for example, when you look at a certain concept from the, you try to define this word, you have these words which are parallel, and you can even illustrate it like this, right? Word, it's line upon line upon line upon line, and all of these illustrate the concept. And you have another concept which is another line upon line, and so on and so forth. So you can see this in language, you can see this in nature. I was giving examples of, for example, the way the trees were, the way, in nature you really have only a few concepts, you can really gather everything together in a handful of concepts like humans, right? Like planets, like trees, like mammals, fish, or insects, whatever. And within each concept you have different objects, how do you say, whatever, which has its own particularity. Like in the category of humans, you have so many humans, each of them is unique, right? But you can all recognize them as being humans just by looking at them. Why? Because they all have the pattern of a human being, okay? When you look at a tree, you've never seen that tree before, but you know the pattern of a tree, and you recognize it instantly because it's a tree. So that's how our knowledge or our brain architecture is, and how actually the universe works. Because otherwise, if we wouldn't work like this, if we weren't able to gather all things together and make how should I say, make find patterns into things, it would be very hard to see nature, because you would look at that tree over there and see, I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's a tree or something, because I've never seen it before. But it's a tree because it falls into the pattern of trees. So that's how the human understanding and working. That's how human understanding works, and this is very important. And there is another. When you take these concepts and you put these concepts over the Bible, you will see that the net result of applying this concept of understanding, meaning finding patterns into things, if you apply these concepts to the Bible, the logical result is this message. So this message is actually really the message that understands the Bible, meaning the message that looks at the Bible and just as you do with the language, just as you do with nature or with other whatever sciences, you just categorize everything into different parallel lines and say, this is actually how the patterns of the Bible. If you look at the Bible, you have these stories, but this story is actually parallel with this story, which is parallel with this story, which is parallel with this story, and so on and so forth. And you're able, when you look at the Bible, if you understand it, you're able to go and define the Bible by going into different other places from the Bible and show it's actually meaning the same thing. And I was saying that's how actually the Bible, or anything, if you can understand something, it means you can summarize it and make it smaller, right? Because I was giving you that illustration of a camera taking photos, and it actually summarizes it, makes the photo smaller. Otherwise, the memory of the phone wouldn't be able to memorize so many photos that we take. And how does it do it? It just finds patterns into things, into the pixels of the picture, and says, if you look in that corner, all the pixels seem to be the same color, and so on and so forth. And these algorithms, they're able to, by finding patterns, they're able to express the picture in a shortened fashion, so no information is lost, and they take out all the redundant information. They take all the redundant information out of it, so that no information is lost, and you can still see the picture, but it's compressed. So that is a very interesting concept, and it applies generally to everything. And that is in order to understand, in order to compress something, to make it smaller, you have to be able to find patterns in it and understand it, because that's what understanding is. Okay, so when we look at the Bible, that's how the Bible becomes a little book, right? Because the Bible is in Revelation chapter 10, the angel Revelation 10 comes in the history of the Millerites, August 11, 1840, with a little book in his hand, and the Millerites eat this book, and we can say that this book is a book of Daniel, or the book of Revelation, or we can say, oh, it's the Bible. And generally speaking, we can say it's the Bible. And how does the Bible become little? It's by you being able to compress it, and you are not able to compress the Bible unless you are able to actually find patterns into the Bible. So I would go on and say that this movement is the only that I know today that is actually able to correctly make the Bible a little book. Other persons, they just say the Bible, remember in the time of the Millerites, when Miller was preaching the hour of judgment, you remember that the theologians of his day, they were bringing the argument that the Bible the prophecies from the Bible of Daniel and Revelation cannot be understood, and I would say the same argument was also brought by the Jews, who I have the Bible verse here. Page 8 of your notes, you have the title. The subtitle is The Sealed Book. Isaiah.
Last week's notes.
Oh, or you just open the Bible, Isaiah 29, verse 10 through 13. Isaiah 29, 10 through 13. And here Isaiah is talking about the state or the condition of God's church in his day, but we know that all the prophets are speaking more for our time than for the time in which they lived, and they're actually not speaking more for our time, they're speaking for every time, for every generation, okay? So, because, you will find that what we read here in Isaiah, Jesus will apply in his own generation. Jesus actually lived about 500, 600 years after Isaiah, and Jesus, he seems to be using the proof text method, and he seems to be saying, when Isaiah was speaking, actually these words that he spake so many years ago, and you think that they only applied in that day, I say they also apply to you today, even if you don't like it. So, Isaiah 29, 10 through 13, for the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep. What is the spirit of deep sleep? You can say that's the Laodicean condition, or the virgins who are sleeping, okay? And hath closed your eyes, you're blind, Laodicean condition. The prophets and your rulers, the seers hath he covered, and the vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which man deliver to one that is learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. Wherefore the Lord saith, forasmuch as these people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of man. Do you remember this last verse? Jesus actually quotes this verse, during his ministry among the Jews. He quotes this last verse from Isaiah. For as much as these people draw near me with their mouth, if you remember this. Okay? So he's actually saying that, these verses from Isaiah apply to that generation, and he didn't quote the upper part, the upper verses, but if you look, they really apply to that generation, because what did that generation do? First of all, you can see clearly in these verses that there are two types of people. Do you see it? There are those that are learned and those that are not learned. You see it? And neither one of them is able to understand the book, the vision. It says, the vision of all, whatever that is. I think it's the Bible. Okay, the vision of all is not understand. It's sealed for both the learned and the unlearned, and they give different reasons. The learned say it is sealed, and the unlearned said, I'm not learned. Okay, and because of this, everybody is in darkness. All of their eyes have closed, as they see, as you can see, as you can read from here. And did this happen in the time of the Jews? Were there two categories of people in the time of Christ? One which was learned and the other which was not? Oh yes, they were, right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, they're all considered the learned men, the people who had the keys of understanding the scriptures. And even Jesus says to them that you have the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and neither do you enter, and neither do you let others enter. Like they had the keys, they were learned, they should have entered, and explained to people the mysteries of the scripture, but they say, no, it's actually a sealed book. And it was actually a sealed book also for them. They were kind of honest because they didn't understand either. Because why didn't they understand? Because they went to the Greeks before, a few hundred years before Christ. They started going to the Greek universities, and they thought, it was a good thing to go there and make like a, how do you say, a change of experience, whatever. You go there and you learn some new things from the Greeks, and they learn some new things from you. And they thought themselves wise enough to discriminate between, the falsehoods of Greeks, of their pagan religion, and the truth of the Jewish religion. And sure enough, after a few generations, maybe even after 4, the things degraded so much. It would be interesting if somebody would find out how many generations passed, and maybe we even find literally 4 generations. I don't know. So the things degraded so much that even the word Sanhedrin, I think the word Sanhedrin is derived from Greek. It's actually a Greek word, Sanhedrin, which means the great house of judgment in Greek. So all the Jewish educational structure has been copied from the Greeks. The fact that they have different degrees, there are some like bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degree that like we have today, the same the Jews had before, in the time of Christ, and this was actually borrowed from the Greeks. It was never like this in the time of the schools of Samuel. And the introduction of this kind of system of this kind of educational system actually resulted in a terrible rejection of Messiah by his own people, because when he was there, they were wondering themselves, how does this man have knowledge, or how does this man know? I don't remember exactly the wording, when he never actually learned. They were wondering, how does he understand the scriptures when he actually never went to our schools or theological institutions? And so the thing is that what the Greek, I suspect, I really want, if it would be very interesting if we could actually find out what the Jews were teaching, what was their doctrine, aside from the fact that they thought that Christ was to be their savior, literally like destroy the Romans and stuff like that. We know that, but I was wondering about their methodology, because I have a feeling, or I have an intuition that they were actually teaching the same thing Adventism is teaching now. That the words of Torah, the prophets of old, they actually applied only to that generation, and they don't apply to this generation. I have this intuition that that's the same that they did, and they would only apply to this generation the things that were good. They never said, "Oh, we are these people who draw near God with their mouths, but their lips do not honor Him." They never said that. Probably when Jesus quoted this verse to them, in their mind was going on like, "What do you mean? This verse is not talking about us. It's talking about the time of Isaiah. It's our." And that's why Jesus actually said, What did He say about them raising up the graves or the tombs of the prophets? How does He word that? Because I don't know, it's in English. It says that you are raising up the tombs of the prophets, like honoring the prophets and honoring their graves and their tombs of the prophets of old. But by doing this, you are actually testifying that you are the children of those who killed these prophets. Jesus is basically saying to them, you have this respect for all these prophets of old, for Isaiah, because they had this respect, really. They thought they were martyrs and prophets of God, and Isaiah was killed by Manasseh, right? And I'm sure they said, "Oh, it was so wrong to kill Isaiah." So they were honoring the death of these prophets as being really, like Adventism is honoring Ellen White now. We have Ellen White feast days and all of this. So we're really honoring. For example, in Romania, there was in 2015, I think we had really something really big, celebrating 100 years from her death or something like that. All these people gathered, and we are kind of honoring. It's the same thing, honoring the graves of the prophet. Celebrating how many years until their death and stuff like that. But the church actually killed Ellen White symbolically, in the same way the Jewish church killed the prophets, literally. They sent her to Australia, and they threw her writings away and her advice away, and so the situation is the same today. And I want to go back to this verse. It says one is learned and the other is not. So God never designed that there's two categories of people in His church. Some that are they have the keys of knowledge, and some that don't have. God designed that everybody has the keys of knowledge, that everybody has understands the methodology that is necessary to understand the Bible, because that's what you really need to understand, the methodology. If you understand the methodology, understanding the methodology is having the necessary tools to dig in for the treasure. But then after you understand the methodology, it's up to you to actually use the methodology, use the tools to dig in for treasure. God is not gonna. We're not supposed to let other people. Not that it's wrong. We can have some glimpses, but we're not supposed to rely, rather, on other people and say, "Oh, I'm not. I don't know how to use these tools. They're too complicated to use for me." Well, no. You have the tools. You have the methodology. Go and dig for hid treasures. And Satan knew this, and Satan said, "Well, how am I going to put these people into darkness?" Well, it's very simple. I'm going to take the tools away from them, and I'm going to give the tools only to a class of people, and even those tools I'm going to twist in such a manner so that they're going to draw out only false jewels out of that quarry, out of that mine. So that's what he actually did. He took the tools, took the methodology away from the people, so that the ordinary people from the Jewish church, they did not know how to interpret the scriptures. That's why they said, "I am not learned." Okay, and he gave these tools to the learned. Okay, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, all these people who were privileged. But they didn't use them in the right manner because of their pride in the heart. They were using them for their own glory. And this is how Satan is always. If you look at the way apostasy comes in the church, that's how it always happens. If you look at the Christian church, it's the same thing that happened in the papacy. They took the Bibles away from the people. and the methodology, and they introduced their own doctrines and traditions, which were not Jewish doctrines and traditions, were Catholic doctrines and traditions. Okay, and the Adventism, the same thing happened. You know, in 1930s with Raymond Cottrell, they did the very work. He did the very work of sending theologians to Greek universities, symbolically, and from these Greek universities, they learned the methodology of the Greeks, and they changed the methodology of Adventism. So they took away from the people the only tools they had to actually draw truth away from the Bible, the proof text method of William Miller. And by taking this away, Satan knew that the people are going to become unlearned, because there's going to be a famine in Adventist church because of their lack of the Word of God. So Satan is actually purposefully doing this, and it's much more effective if you think about it. And Satan is smart. It's much more effective in the long term to change the methodology than to change some doctrine, because doctrines are the result of methodology. You know, the reason we have a different doctrine than Adventism, or not different, you can say different, you know, it's more complete, you're beautiful, whatever, it's different in certain aspects, is that we use a different methodology. And the reason Adventism has a different doctrine than whatever other church is that they also use a different methodology. So each church with its own peculiar doctrine uses a different methodology. And you might even argue that most of them don't use a methodology at all, really. Like, you know, when William Miller was talking about his rules, he was emphasizing that, one, the student of prophecy, when he's studying the Bible, he must have a method of study, like a system, something. He uses the word method and system, I think. You don't have to go, you know, randomly from place to place and, you know, draw your conclusion randomly and stuff like that. You have to be really having a system of interpretation, and most of the people don't even have that. And Adventism had that, and now it has a wrong one, and the Lord is restoring that system to this movement. I would say He's restoring the system in an even more glorious manner, because we are using proof text method of 14 rules of William Miller, but I think we're understanding the rules of William Miller a bit more than the Millerites did understand, because, you know, there is the new light, the increase of knowledge. It's an increase, it's not a decrease. So if it's an increase of knowledge, you just think about that. I said that the doctrines are actually the result of methodology, right? You have a certain doctrine because you read the Bible. We all have the same Bibles. You know, we all have the same Bible. And in Adventism, we all have the Bible in Ellen White. But how come we actually read the passages differently? When Adventisms look at 90:13, they see that's the whatever event, and we say, oh, that's 9/11, or, you know, we interpret things differently only because we have different methodologies. So that means that when a new reform line starts, and you have an increase of knowledge, you have an increase in doctrine or light, and a better understanding in doctrine and light, that actually has to come because you have an increase of light in methodology. Do you understand? Your methodology has to grow with your light. Like, you have to actually find better tools to get better joules. Does it make sense? In order to go down deeper the earth, your tools might be a little bit weak, and you say, oh, I'm going to use a better one now to get even deeper. So I think this movement has been given better tools, and we have even better, bigger joules than William Miller did. And that's amazing. Praise the Lord for that. But these tools are not contradicting, or not, they're actually the same. You know, the foundation is the same as the Millerites used, but now this is much more advanced and complete. And this is amazing how this can be, for me at least. So then we also looked up for the meaning. I think this is very important, because I said we are living in this world, we are born, and at some point in time, sooner or later, you come to the truth, you are converted. Some of you were not born Adventists. I was born Adventist, and I did not have this same striking conversion experience that some other people had to return from drugs and alcohol to Jesus, but anyway, everybody who is going to be saved, even if you are born Adventist, has to be going through a conversion experience. And what is the conversion experience? How do people actually relate to that experience? When after they are converted and they tell their conversion experience to other people, how do they actually word it? Like, how do they say, well, I was converted, Jesus found me, or I found Jesus, and stuff like that, Well, what happened really to their life? Like, what really happened to, before, just picture an image with before and after. How is before and how is after? There is a change here, change in understanding. Change in understanding.
And change in character.
A change in character. Yeah.
And behavior.
Yeah. Well, would you say that from that point on, their life starts to have a meaning, right? Because before that, they didn't have any meaning, and this problem of the meaning of life, we discussed this before, is not a problem so easy. It's, philosophers and all these wise men from the thousands of years have been thinking, like, why are we here? Even the book of Ecclesiastes, read Ecclesiastes and see that Solomon was having the same questions. He was questioning the meaning of life. He was thinking, well, why? And David, his father, the same. Like, we do all these things, and I'm a righteous person, or I'm a rich person, and I'm going to the same place as a wicked man, or a poor man, or whatever. I'm a king, and he's my servant. And we're going to the same destination, in the ground, in the earth. What's the difference? Why would I try to behave better? Because it seems that we all receive the same payment at the end. Okay, and his father David, in his Psalms, is actually lamenting in the same manner when he's looking at the wicked people and seeing how good they prosper and how rich they are and fat and happy and their kids all around them and living long lives, and he's looking at himself and he's seeing all this tribulation all around him, and he's knowing that he's worshiping the Lord God Jehovah, and he's abstaining himself for doing all these wrong things, and he's wondering, is it worth it? Like, why am I doing this? So the problem of meaning of life is as much as a Christian question as it's maybe a secular question. You can ask as a Christian, what's my meaning? Why do I do this? And the way you define the meaning of your life is no different from the way you should define the meaning of a word. When you define the meaning of a word, you go to a dictionary and you find parallel words to define the meaning of that word, okay? And when I say, when you find the meaning of your life, what you have to be able to do is you go to the dictionary and you find parallel lives that are, that you follow, that you have to follow, that are parallel to you. And that dictionary is the Bible. You go to the Bible and say, what is my meaning? And usually most people find Christ as the pattern. Ellen White, right, uses Christ and says he is the pattern man. Pattern means, right, is related to meaning, because finding meaning is finding patterns. So in order to have meaning, you must be able to put your life on a line and put the life of Christ on another line, and the life of William Miller on another line, and the life of Martin Luther and Elijah and Moses and Noah and all these reformers, and say, this is my line, this is my life, okay? But this life has meaning because it's actually parallel with the life of Jesus, with the life of Noah, with the life of all these reformers. And that's how I know my life now has meaning. Otherwise, there's actually no meaning, because if you are not converted, I ask you, who does your life parallel? What is your pattern? What are you trying to do in this life? What is your model? who are you trying to become? In which direction are you going? Okay, so if you're not converted, you will not be able to give a satisfactory answer. You know, you might give me some theoretical answer, but in yourself, you might not. I'm sure you won't be satisfied with your answer. But this present truth message is actually, that's what conversion, I think, also means, is that you go and you look and you find your model in the history of salvation, and from that point on, you fall in love with that model, which is Christ, because Christ is Noah, Christ is Elijah, Christ is every reformer, because he's manifesting himself in the lives of all these reformers, and you find meaning by doing this. Otherwise, your life is meaningless. It's without a pattern. So, do you see the parallelism now? Like how you define a word is how you define your life. And so now, how do you do this? Like, what do you use? Because you know, in order to be saved, you have to be righteous, right? That's what we have this term, righteousness by faith, right? And I want to ask you, how do you attain righteousness? Well,
it's given.
It's given.
Right. We could us of ourselves, because you said you know you go into your dictionary, which is the Bible, and that gives you your definition of righteousness, which is not in us, but imparted to us through from God.
But we have to have a part, because righteousness is right doing. We have to do the right thing, right? So it's a combination of divinity and humanity, actually, because you find it in the Bible. That's true, and God is, without Christ we can have no righteousness. That's true, perfectly true. But in the same time, you have to put some humanity, some decision work in there. You said something?
Well, you become righteous as you walk up on your line towards your goal.
Yeah.
The meaning of.
Well, I would say you are righteous as you walk, actually, because on all of these paths, you're not righteous here and here you're not. You're righteous here, and you keep your garments spotless all throughout your line. And I'll actually show you how an illustration of how that works. I'll try to show you and see how it works. Any other answers?
I was going to say you hunger and thirst after it.
After what? Righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hunger and thirst after righteousness.
Very big deal.
So,
What's PTM again?
present truth message.
Oh, okay.
That's from the last study. So, just as the Bible says, righteousness is actually by faith. The righteous shall live by his faith, says in Habakkuk. In the same chapter, which talks about the two charts, right? In Habakkuk chapter 2, after the prophet is talking about the tables and the vision tarry, wait for it. And then after the tarrying time, it says, the righteous shall live by his faith. So I think that's the first mention in the Bible. I did not check it, but I'm pretty sure that's the first mention in the Bible of righteousness by faith. That's where Paul in Hebrews and in other places actually derives the term righteousness by faith, and that's by implication, that's where Jones and Wagner, they say righteousness by faith, righteousness by faith. So by faith, what does it mean? It's through faith. Would you say it's correct when I say righteousness through faith? Like faith is the means of achieving righteousness. Like you achieve righteousness if you have faith. By faith, you achieve righteousness. It's like it's the money you need to buy righteousness with. Okay, faith. So Now, what is this faith, and how is this connected to the present truth? Why do we say that only through this present truth you can achieve righteousness? You look all around yourselves, and you see all around you so many people claiming to be righteous, not directly, by implying that they're doing the right thing, that they're doing health reform and country living, and studying prophecy, and really nice people, really nice. They hug you, they're super nice. You cannot say anything bad about them. But in the same time, they're rejecting this message, and we say, oh, because you're rejecting this message, everything else is in vain. We say that, right? Like, your country living, everything, you're going to be lost because you do not accept, the message that some guy, gave you. It's a board and some lines and some charts behind him. You're lost. Whatever right works you're doing. Why do we have the right to say that? I mean, aren't we a bit radical or crazy by saying that? Maybe there are people. Why would do you understand? Why is this message really salvational? Like, why would other persons who seem to be nice people, but they don't understand it? There's also in the church, I've been confronted many times with this rhetoric and say, oh, I don't agree with what you teach, but we can be friends, and they're really nice people.
The Pharisees did the right thing, but they killed Jesus.
Yeah,
they
the
were nice
Pharisees.
people.
They're Pharisees. They did the right things. So, what I want to say is that, the answer to this question is that if you say that the righteousness is only achieved by faith, you need this kind of money to buy righteousness. It's only faith, and you cannot come with false coins, because God is smart enough to see if you have false faith, right? False money. If you're trying to sneak up some false righteousness there, he's going to say, no, I'm not going to I'm not going to give you that righteousness. So, okay, so righteousness is by faith. So it means that no one can buy righteousness without the right faith. And I want to say that the only persons that I know, and I think the only persons that there are, who are actually having those money, who are actually having that faith, and the only message who's offering you that faith is this message. And you know why? Like, it sounds good, we like to say that, but many things we like to say about ourselves that I would contend we don't really understand. Like, we like to say our message is salvational, but we have to really understand why our message is salvational in a logical manner, so we can actually prove to the people, everybody who see, this is why it's salvational. This is why you will die if you don't receive this. So the answer is very simple. And I'll start with an illustration. I was, actually it's a little experience, fun experience. I was in university, and in university I learned physics. And I had a teacher who knew that I was a Christian, and not all the teachers there are Christians. Some are atheists, some are, they believe in God, they're not practicing Christians. But there is one of these teachers who's atheist, and he was he was a joking figure, joking all the time. Sometimes he was also joking about me and being a Christian and stuff like that. And nobody would really take him seriously, but still he was joking about my faith. And one time he actually says, see, Filip, what we do here? We are prophets. We're predicting the future. We're predicting all these events like eclipses, and we're predicting how atoms will move, how collisions will take place, because we know of all these laws. And he was kind of mocking me, because I believe in prophets and stuff like that. And I said, oh, that's so interesting. I think you really are a prophet in my mind, saying, that's so interesting. So if a prophet when so I say that when you understand the laws of nature, you understand it because you want to be able to predict things in the future, right? Like, I can say with a certainty that if I drop this from my hand, it's gonna fall. So I make a prophecy that if you do this, this is gonna happen, right? And how do I do that? Through what I do that?
Knowledge.
Well, through faith.
Yeah.
Because do I really have the evidence? Because we take it for granted, as I said, that the laws of nature do not change. We take it for granted that the principles that surround us do not change and that they will ever be the same. And that they apply in the same place. But I actually never try to drop this paper at this point in time, in this place. And I don't know if it will work. I could not know, but I kind of think that by faith it works because I've experienced so much things in life. I've dropped so many things in other places that I kind of already have this intuition that that's going to happen, and I make a prophecy. So that's the whole point of the laws of nature. That's the whole point of scientists actually trying to find these laws, because they use these laws to be able to make predictions and say, even though we never been on Mars, we can send a rover, a machine in Mars, and build that machine here on Earth according to the laws we have on Earth, of course adapted to the conditions in Mars, but still according to the same laws, and send it there and have faith that the same laws we have on Earth that we teach students in university are going to be there on Mars. And sure enough, they send the rover and it works perfectly there, right? It seems that the laws are the same. So they are able to make these kinds of prophecy, and they're able to plan for the future because they know the laws. So the knowledge of these laws, the knowledge of patterns of the landscape you go through allows you to see into the future. It is the light you have from behind that goes directly into the future. Okay? Because if you how can you see the future, without knowing these laws? You cannot know. But if you know the laws, you say, well, I know. How do you know that the sun is going to set at 4:48 p.m. today? You have an app on your phone. It tells you exactly when the sun is going to set. That's a prophecy, actually. You never view that as a prophecy, but we take it for granted. Many, you remember when we read that quote, we said that the hand of God is actually moving the planets around, and it's not because of their own energy, but it's the hand of God moving them. The hand of God could actually decide, because God is not a robot, He has free will. He could decide, I'm going to turn the sun a little bit more and the sunset is going to be at 8:45 p.m. this evening. But He's not. He's always consistent in His own patterns, and because He is, we have adapted ourselves, maybe it's not the right word, but yeah, we have adapted ourselves to and learned His principles, and we've made calendars, we know when the sunset, sunrise is going to be. We even know, for example, that in 23 years and so many days and so many hours, an asteroid is going to pass by the Earth at exactly this distance, and we can even make preparation for it, and whatever things, we can see into the future. So the knowledge of the laws of nature allows the scientists to see into the future. Do you see that? And the sight that they have into the future, it's by faith. And by doing this, by being able to make these predictions, they are actually not doing anything different than a prophet's work. Because that's what a prophet's work is. It's actually being able to predict events into the future, right? So, the only difference is they're not prophets of Bible, they're prophets of nature. Okay? But they're still prophets nonetheless. So what that teacher was mocking me, he was actually telling the truth. He was saying he was a prophet, and he really was. It's a natural prophet. So if you go on to the Bible, you can actually see the same principle, because your understanding of the patterns of the Bible, the lines that we teach, they're the patterns of the Bible. They're the way the Bible, the history of salvation works. And Ellen White says the laws of the Bible, the spiritual laws, the laws that, the seed of truth grows through, are actually the same laws as the natural laws. They're not different. So you can be a prophet of the Bible in the same way scientists are prophets of nature. Okay? And how do scientists make predictions? Based upon the evidence they have. The faith that they have is not lacking evidence. They have evidence for their predictions, right? I mean, I don't say, the moon is going to fall on the earth tomorrow at that time. And the scientists, they look at me and they say, are you crazy? Why do you say that? And I say, well, because I believe. I have faith. And if I believe hard enough, I know that it's going to happen. And they'll look at me and say, you are so crazy. And they'll be so right. You're crazy. Okay? And so the faith is not believing hard enough without evidence. And if you believe hard enough, it's going to happen. Faith is not that. Okay? People, and I'm sure I had this misunderstanding actually. And I have a intuition that I was not the only one who believed this. And still there are people who believe that faith is actually believing something without evidence. Because if you have evidence, there's no faith, You kind of need to not have evidence so you can express your faith. Because faith is kind of like, you're blind and you don't see anything in the future, but God tells you something from your word, and you don't really see why that He tells you that, and you don't understand it, but you still believe it, and you do something by faith. That's not faith. Faith is based upon understanding. Faith is no different than scientists making predictions. And they have reasons for making predictions. If I say the moon is going to fall, they say, well, the scientists who would take their telescopes and they would look and they would measure everything, the trajectory of the moon and all this, and say, well, there's no way it's going to fall because I know how the laws work, and I would be a false prophet and they would be a true prophet. I would be having a false faith and they would be having a true faith. Okay? So now when you go to the Bible, the faith, you are actually having, we're predicting things into the future, and if you're aware of the things that have been preaching at the School of the Prophets recently, we have been doing that more and more, predicting events in the future and stuff like that. 2019, 2020, so many things will come to us, will happen. And this is not actually evidenceless. It's not something which is without evidence. It is the same principle as in nature. You have all these patterns, you have all these laws. For example, you have a line, right? And the line of the everlasting gospel. And you apply this line and you see how it applies to different generations. And then when you look around you, you look to, this line is your law. And you say, well, this law is going to apply today as it applied yesterday. Right? Just as the scientists do. The scientists make this step and say, I believe these laws of nature will apply today as they applied yesterday. And tomorrow, the same. So we do the same. We go to the Bible, we find these laws, we find these structures and say, well, these are not only in the past, these will be in the present, are in the present and will be in the future. And because we say this, we're able to actually make predictions and say, well, probation is going to close for us in that and that point, or that event is going to happen and Islam is going to hit, or whatever is going to happen. And it's not something, oh, I just dreamed it or I'm just feeling it, It's based upon evidence. that we had from the lines for the structures, from the Bible, and it's actually, the mechanism is actually no different than that. And if you just a second. If you open the Bible at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, that is the verse that defines what faith is. What does that verse say?
Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen.
The faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. So I would say faith do you see here a repeater in large?
Yeah, because it's telling you that faith is
Where is the repeat in large?
the substance,
Okay.
and then the evidence. Faith is the evidence.
So can you say that the substance of things hoped for is the same as the evidence of things not seen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the faith is the substance
You have it?
It's on the notes. In your last week's notes.
I didn't bring last week's notes.
So, does this work for you? If I draw this verse like this, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So faith is the substance or the evidence. Faith is evidence. Actually, evidence equals faith. Okay? So, or substance. What is substance? Is a composed word, or how do you say? It's composed of sub, which means under, right?
Mm-hmm.
And stance, which means standing. So substance is understanding. You see it?
Mm-hmm.
So faith is understanding, which is evidence. And you remembered our definition of understanding, right? How you understand a word, or you can say meaning in the same way. So really, that is what faith is. Like understanding. If you don't understand something, people think that's what the faith is, something you don't understand. Like you have to not understand something, and because you're not understanding that, you have faith. Like it's like people understand. They say that faith is actually the magical thing that supplies for your lack of understanding. It's like, this is what I understand, and for the rest I need faith. Like my glass is half filled with my understanding, and I'm just going to pour some faith in to just fill up the glass, okay? People have this misunderstanding, but this is not what it is. Really, faith is understanding. You know, there's nothing else other than understanding. Really. If you don't have understanding, you don't have faith. So, uh, actually, I hope you can now see much clearer why this message is salvational, and why we can actually really say that even if you do all these works, outward works, if you don't accept this message, you cannot have righteousness by faith, because there is no way to understand faith in the context of the Bible other than through this message. There's no way. People come with definitions, but there's none like this. Like, faith is the ability to find patterns into the Bible, and based on these patterns to make predictions, which are based upon evidence, right? That's faith. So, when you say you walk by faith, did you know you literally walk by faith? Like literally when you walk, your body actually walks by faith every time, every step you take, because you literally, your body makes the assumption that the next second the laws of nature will not change, and based upon that assumption, it contracts the muscles, based upon that assumption, and says, well, I think the laws of nature will not change, they'll remain the same, and I think that this surface is like this and like that, and we adapt to this, that's why I say we walk by faith, literally, like our bodies do walk by faith, and we are nothing more than an illustration of the inner body who has to walk by the same kind of faith. Okay? So, faith that does not supply for your ignorance. If you are ignorant, you cannot have faith. Period. You can only have faith when you have understanding or evidence. Okay? So this is very important. Faith does not supply for our lack of knowledge. If you don't have knowledge, you don't have faith. So as I said, I know no other people on this planet living right now than this movement who's actually able to have faith, because nobody else are actually able to understand or have evidence or find patterns or find meaning in the Bible and align their lives with this meaning. So when you say, I have to have the righteousness by faith, you have to think about this faith, really. It's not some kind of magical thing you just believe in, like a placebo effect. You really believe it and it's self-fulfilling. No, it's not like that. So,
and faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God.
Yes. So you have faith when, for example, Ellen White's quote, when she speaks about preaching of Paul, that his preaching was actually based upon the sure word of prophecy, and he was trying to explain to the Jews, and not only to the Jews, to everybody, the prophecies relating to Messiah's first advent, and he was actually showing them the evidence is necessary so that they can have faith in Messiah, right? We sometimes believe that the people were converted a bit emotionally, like some were saying, oh, believe in Jesus, and people saying, okay, I believe. Okay, and that was the Holy Spirit. It was not really like that, it seemed to be like that, but it was actually, they really had Bible studies, and people's minds were impressed with the evidence and understanding they received, and they compared the history with the prophecies, and they say, well, it means that your prophecies work. Well, okay, what do you mean? What do you mean comparing history and prophecy? Because we use this concept, history and prophecy has to agree, stuff like that. Okay, what do we mean by that? what is the counterpart of doing this in the natural world? When, for example, when some scientist, he says, they do an experiment, and usually when they do an experiment, you don't do an experiment unless you are expecting some result. You just don't do a random experiment. You're doing something to find something, like especially if it's an expensive one, you need like a laser and stuff like that, or expensive materials. You're expecting, for example, to find a certain reaction take place, and you're trying to get to that result. And let's say there's one of these experiments, and they're trying to prove a certain theory, a certain theory of physics. And there are two scientists, and one is actually the one who proposed the theory, and he's kind of keen on it, and he thinks, I think the outcome of the experiment is going to prove my theory. And the other is a bit skeptical, and he thinks, no, I don't think the outcome is going to prove. And the experiment is actually the one who decides, ultimately. Reality is the one who hits you and says, no, this is the correct theory. And they do the experiment, and let's say the guy who proposed the theory was right. Let's say that the experiment proved his model. So what they do is they do a model of reality. Like they say, well, when this particle is going to hit this and this is going to happen and blah, blah, blah. And they say, they don't verify that yet. They kind of have that intuition, And they say, well, okay, let's verify if what you say is really true. And there are pros and cons, and they say, well, let's verify. And they do the experiment, and it comes out to be just exactly as the scientist, prophesied or predicted. Okay? So that actually proves that his theory, his mathematical formulas or whatever, are correct. What do you mean are correct? Are correctly describing reality. Okay? So that's how prophecy and history agrees. Prophecy always agrees with history. Okay? If it doesn't, it's a false prophecy. Okay? We don't have to twist prophecy to agree with history. Like we have to just look at history and somehow derive prophecy out of it. And it's very strange, Like, what do you mean look at history and derive prophecy out of it? Have you seen Tessa's presentation? Have you seen how she derives prophecy out of history? Have you seen how she's looking at those diadochi words which are not even in the Bible? Those words are literally not in the Bible. The history of Pyrrhus and all these guys, they're not in the Bible. Just history. And she's looking at it saying, this is what will describe the events of our line, and she's looking at the German Revolution, which is, again, not in the Bible. And she says, and even some other revolutions we say, they're in the Bible, but she's looking into historical bits and pieces that are not in the Bible, the Reign of Terror, and all these kinds of stuff. Reign of Terror isn't in the Bible, but like the Bolshevik Revolution, for example, is not in the Bible, right?
Well, it's because the lines are like the laws of nature that repeat, so it repeats even though it's not in the Bible. If it's alive and it existed, it repeats the same.
Exactly, because these lines are actually a description of history. Like you describe the histories with these lines. And you should be able to, everywhere you look in history, you should be able to find the same patterns. Right? When you look in nature, everywhere you look, you find the same laws. It's not that, the laws of nature are just here, and if you go outside, there's no more laws of nature. If you look into history, everywhere you look in history, you find these laws. So even though you look outside of the Bible, you can find these same patterns. You look at the history of the First and Second World War, which are completely outside of the Bible. You find patterns there. You look at the diadochi words, completely outside of the Bible, you find patterns there. So history and prophecy agrees. Do you see this is very interesting, because people had problems with Tessa's presentations, and they were saying, how can she or not have problems in a sense, but they're asking themselves, why can we actually do this? Why can we look at some history which is not in the Bible and make some prophetic significance out of it? And that is the question. The reason why we ask this question is because we judge prophecy in a very mystical manner. Like we think prophecy is something really magical, esoteric, whatever in nature, and we never actually view prophecy as a natural thing, like as natural as the laws of nature, really. And this is very natural, actually. Like if you look at the economy, like there is no secret, and you already know that the economy has its cycles and repeats over and over again, and they even repeat regularly in time. And right now, there are people who, really, really smart people who are building algorithms to actually predict the future of how the economy is going to evolve. And they're able to predict the future of stock prices and, invest according to their predictions, and actually it works because they always make money. If their predictions wouldn't work, because that's what they do. They look at all the history of the economy just as we look at the history of the Bible, and they run these machines over that history, these algorithms, these computers, and they chew all this data, they digest it, and they're able to come up with patterns that always repeat in these histories. And then they look for patterns in the present time and say, based upon this pattern, I predict that the price of oil is going to go in this direction within the next year. And they invest their money according to those predictions, and it works, because that's how the nature of reality is. Everything is predictable to a degree. And we'll reach to that in a minute, why everything is predictable to a degree and it's not actually fundamentally predictable every detail. So it's no wonder, like the human psychology, people are able to predict the way you are going to behave also to a very big degree. Like that's how marketing and advertising works. They know you well enough so that they can show you images that they know how you will react to, so you can actually buy the product they want you to buy. And that wouldn't work if you wouldn't have patterns. And
that's how they track you.
Yeah.
They ask questions over and over and over again.
Yeah, they track you all the time, and especially Google is doing that a lot, and Facebook.
Amazon.
So people are lying too.
Let me give you an example. I think I discussed with you when we were discussing together about Mexico and how beautiful the beaches of Mexico are. This week I entered on Facebook, and guess what I got? I got ads on holidays in the beaches of Mexico. Are you kidding me? Like, how did they find that out? I was like, buy now cheap hotels in Mexico and stuff like that. Like, what do you mean? And it was just a verbal discussion between both of us. So they're able to access your microphone, process the data you say, and many other things. Like they're able to. Let me give you an example. There has been an experiment done about subliminal influence. You know what subliminal influence? Like you are influenced without you knowing about it. Like you go in a store and they play some music and they show you some colors, and they make you buy more stuff than you actually need, and you think that it was your decision to buy. That's what's scary about it, because it's you think that you are the one in control of yourself, of your decision, when you're actually not. Okay, it was actually them who pushed you to buy 10 pounds of chocolate. Okay, so then they made an experiment to test and prove how the power of subliminal influence works. I'm going a bit off track, but it's okay, because we're also going to talk about information work. So they set up this experiment. It was fake, a company who had a cemetery, private cemetery. They wanted to hire some designers to make a logo for the cemetery, you know. They had a name, whatever, cemetery, and they wanted to, and they called these 3 designers. And the designers were the unsuspecting subjects. They didn't know they were part of the experiment, you know. So what they tried to do is they tried to see if they could influence the designers to draw the logo they wanted them to draw. And what they did is, from the time they took the designers from the airport, because what they did is they took the designers from the airport, they drove them in a car through the town, and they put them in a hotel room together for 5 hours to work together in an office, whatever, and then after they work together, they come to meet them. And all this journey from the airport to the hotel room, they put on the side different signs. Like they put, for example, some people who were running, some joggers, they were running by the car, and they had on their t-shirt, they had a harp drawn, you know, like a playing harp. And they put some other billboard with some name on it, and they put some other, and they would make sure that the designers would see those things. And so they are trying to subliminally influence them on their way through. So when the designers reached the place where they started to draw, you know, they had like a brainstorm, and they came with all these ideas. And after a few hours of ideas, they said, oh, we're ready with the first proposal, with the first sketch. So they made a sketch of how the logo would look like. And they said, we're ready to show you. And the cemetery owners said, well, before you show us, we're going to show you something. And they showed them the logo that they wanted them to draw. And it was like 95% the same. The guys were terrified. They said, what are you doing? Like, what is this? Like, they thought it was something supernatural. Like, are you reading our minds? You know, because they were alone in the room. You know, they didn't have cameras or stuff like that. So they were able to actually influence those designers to make a logo that is, you know, in a certain way. And the scary part of it all is the fact that they thought their decisions were independent. You know, they thought that they were actually, it was them, their own original idea, right? Oh, it's my idea. Actually, it was not. So the power, this wouldn't work if people wouldn't have an understanding of the human mind. So psychologists and those that work in marketing have a really good understanding of how your mind works, and they can put you through some experience, and by putting you through that experience, they can make you do some things that you think you want to do, you know, but they're actually. And I'm gonna say, this is kind of the same that's happening in the present truth, only in a good way. God is doing the same kind of subliminal influence to us, you know, like the same mechanism, I think, but only in a good way. Maybe I would be wrong, but I feel like, because that's why the God, mystery of godliness is called a mystery. That's why the Holy Spirit works in manners that we don't really understand. But Jesus said the wind blows through different directions, but nobody knoweth from which direction it cometh, you know. So
our minds are being influenced by the Word of God.
Your mind is
And the Word of God
influenced.
is His mind.
Yeah. When you listen to these presentations, when you study the Word of God, the Word of God is influencing you in ways you don't know that it's influencing you. It makes you make decisions that are good for you, but which you wouldn't have taken, you know, if you wouldn't have studied or wouldn't have gone through that experience. So the scary part of our minds is that we are much more influenced by the exterior world than we think we are. We think we are so independent, I'm just doing this and that because that's how I wanted to do. But we're so much influenced, and that's why we cannot say, oh, I'm going to be independent. No, you just have to choose your master. It's no way you can be without a master in this world. You have to choose, and that's why it's safest for you to be here, so you can be subliminally influenced by in a safe way, you know, rather than be there and be subliminally influenced in a unsafe way and start doing decisions that you think you're doing that are actually influenced by others. So are we going off track again here? No. What is the timing? How should we split this?
However you want, we can do lunch at 1. However you do it, just
Lunch at 1.
Like we did last time. Just helps me coordinate what I'm having to do elsewhere.
Okay. So at 12:30 we have to be ready, so we can start preparing for lunch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now so now I think you can see why everything is actually much more predictable than you think it is, and the only reason why you think it's unpredictable, like even the economy, because everything has a cause really. Like when you say, you know, one of the most random things, people usually don't understand it, but one of the most random things is the stock market. You have whatever thing that happened in a stock market, like a crash or something, and people think, well, it's unpredictable. But after the event, they look back and say, well, that's why it happened. You know, it happened because this and this. So I asked them, okay, if you can tell after the event why it happened, it means that it was actually predictable, but you weren't able to predict because of your own ignorance. Like you didn't know all the variables, all the things that were going on. But if you knew everything and you were smart enough, or if you have a smart enough computer that would know everything, it would be able to predict. So you can see that these predictions, they work even at the human mind. Let me give you an example. There is a documentary series I really recommend. It's called Mind Field, like the field, you know, mind field. And they're testing the way the mind works. And really I have learned many things that apply to our spiritual experience, like to the Bible. They're testing, for example, conformity. People, they want to conform, they want to be like the others, and the power of subliminal influence. And they had a free will experiment. And now we're going to go and start discussing about free will and the nature of man, because this subject is quite delicate. And what they had, you know, they put these, how do you say, things, electrodes on your head to measure the brain activity, okay?
Yeah.
So they called somebody and they said, well, this is an experiment. It's a game. It's like you play a little bit, and we just want to see how your brain works. Cool. So they put these electrodes, and they give them a box with a button, and that button can light up red and make a sound like that. You know, when it lights up red and makes a sound. And at the beginning, they just tell the subject, whenever you want, just press the button. You know, it's not going to light up red, nothing bad is going to happen. Just for 10 minutes, you sit on the chair and you press the button whenever you want. Just randomly, if you want now, and then if you want after a minute, just press the button. And they did that, you know. They had to press the button a few times. And what the box was doing is measuring the brain activity of what happens when you decide to, the brain pattern of what happens when you decide to press the button, okay? And it learned that pattern. The box learned to recognize what happens when you want to press the button. So then they went to the second part of the game, and the second part of the game, they said, look, now you can also press the button whenever you want, except when the button starts lighting up red. So when it lights up red and it starts sounding, you just take your hand away, don't press the button, okay? But what they did was, because they have learned the patterns of his brain when he decides to press the button, whenever they recognized that pattern in the brain, they started lighting up lit up the button. So what happened in the next part of the game, whenever they wanted to press the button lighted up, and they actually, every time they were stopped. You say, oh, okay. And they start noticing this. Every time I want to press the button, I cannot because it's going red. Okay, how does that happen? And at the end they explained them, actually we've measured the patterns of your brain, the waves, the electromagnetic waves that happen in the brain, the impulses, electric impulses in your brain. And we've noticed this pattern, and then whenever we see this pattern, we make the button light up, and that's how it is. And some of them said, yeah, but you know what, I have actually realized that sometimes the button would go red even when I didn't want to press it. And they looked at them and said, how do you know you were not going to want to press it? Because it's really a serious question, because it has been proved that the decisions we make, they're first made in our subconscious state, and then the decision goes from subconscious to conscious, and then you are aware you decide to do something, but sometimes you are not aware you will decide to do something. So the decision is actually there before you are aware of it. So they said, how you know you were actually not aware of it, and the machine detected it before you were aware and lit up the thing in red, and you were just stopped, it just disappeared. So that experiment actually exposes the how much we could predict of the human brain if we had the knowledge of it. If you could have electrodes on everyone's head and analyze what's happening in everybody's brain really accurately, how much you could predict. So then there comes a question which is very valid, which has been asked by philosophers for a long time. If this is true, if you could theoretically know all the laws and you could have all the information of this world, the world is made out of these little particles. They're called atoms. And in physics, there is a concept which says, if you know the initial I draw here the circumstances and the law as a arrow, and then you have the result. You remember that? Like the circumstances, you apply the law to a certain circumstance, and you have the result. I'll draw it again because it's very important to see. So, circumstance. So the circumstance can be 1, 2, 3, and the result is 1, 2, 3. You have one circumstance, you apply the law, and you get the result. So you have another circumstance, you apply the same law, you get a different result. You all remember this? So, thank you. The question is, if we knew, so that's what actually science teaches normally. Like, if you know the circumstances well enough, and you also know the laws, you can predict the result. Like if I have some, you know how pool table works, with those balls, and let's say I know where each ball is, and I can say I'm gonna hit that ball with that in that direction with that much force. So I know all the circumstances, I know the laws of physics. I can predict where each ball is gonna go. You know, how they're gonna hit, which one is gonna go in which direction. So if you have the circumstances and the laws, you can predict the result. So the question that has arisen is, what if we say that the pool table is our brain? You know, in our brain we have all these atoms, all these chemicals, all this everything going on. We don't know them yet, but let's say we knew them. Let's say theoretically we knew all the circumstances of our brain, of our body, and we also knew the laws. Today we don't know any. We don't know the circumstances, and we also don't know full well the laws. There's still laws of nature that are still in process of being discovered. But theoretically, the question is, if you knew everything, the circumstances and the laws, would it be possible to predict everything that a person would do? Like, right, as I said, you have these electrodes and they measure everything in your brain, and they also know the laws, and they can actually say that you are going to say this and he's going to react like that, and I'm going to respond with this, and I'm going to go in that direction now. Could you actually do that? Is that what actually God does? And if you could do that, do we really actually have free will? The answer is, if you could do that, we don't have free will, really. Because free will is actually something that is unpredictable. Because if you do you understand why? Because if
It could change any minute.
yeah, you know, because then if this would be true, you could say, well, the reason I sinned, the reason I made this sin today was because of the circumstances and the laws of nature that actually pushed me to do this sin. It was not my fault, it was not my decision, it was just how natural course of event works, right? Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
So we have this we have this problem, and as I said, philosophers for a long time have thought about this, the implications. There are some who don't believe we have free will, and there are some who say, well, we actually have free will. And those who don't believe we have free will, they use this model, and they say everything is predictable in nature. The only reason we say it's not predictable is because of our own ignorance. You know, we don't know. Actually, when you toss a coin and you say that's random, that's not really random. It's random related to you because you don't know. But if you knew, you could predict, you could actually flip a coin in such a way so it would fall in one direction or the other. There have been robots made that flip coins however way you want them to. You just say, I want you to toss a coin heads or tails, whatever, they can do it. You know, so it's not actually random. So many things we say it's random, they're not random. But is there anything random? And because if there's nothing random, I don't want to complicate things, but do you understand? If there's nothing random, then there's no free will. So then the saving thing came, the saving element came in science, and they actually discovered in the last century, in the 20th century, that if you look at the smallest scale of the universe, really microscopic scale, really small scale. Do you remember when I was drawing you the atoms? You know, and I told you that the atom doesn't actually look like this. It actually looks like this. You remember that?
Yeah, that was for those of us that were there Monday.
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 Sabbath.
No, I was on Sabbath, I remember. Or
Yeah,
Monday.
you did it Sabbath too.
So, okay, this is the nucleus and these are the electrons. And what did I say about these electrons? I said that they teleport themselves from one place to the other. And the way they behave is actually randomly. Like scientists, they have tried to find a way, have tried to find a law for them, to predict them, to say, well, I predict it's going to be in that way, or I predict it's going to do that. And for 50 or 60 years, the most brilliant minds have tried to formalize theoretical things and make very good experiments, and nobody actually found anything. It's the most random thing we know. And I think it's fundamentally random. And because of this, at a very microscopic level, there is an unpredictable element, you know, in nature. God has put this seed within nature so that not actually everything is predictable. You know, not actually everything. That's why I say everything is predictable to a certain degree. But people have been led to believe that really everything is predictable, and that's dangerous. That's a dangerous conclusion. Because if everything is predictable, it means that there is no responsibility for sin or for anything. Because you are just the result of your circumstances. You know, you were born and educated in a certain way, you don't have anything to do with that. Then you're just no more than a, you know, whatever, a planet going around the sun, which doesn't have free will, really.
But isn't that now predictably unpredictable?
Yes, it is. Do you know why? Because their behavior is split 50-50%. They have a property called spin. And the spin, there are two types of spin, up and down. And when you measure the spin of an electron, you cannot of a certainty say it's going to be up or down, but you can of a certainty say there's 50% chance it's up, 50 is down. So that's very interesting, because even in that unpredictability, there is the chances are set. It's always 50%. It's not like 73 and 27%.
So on that note, this is going to be probably kind of weird, but because we're human beings and we do have free will, we have two outside sources, God and then Satan, that they're fighting for our attention. And so it's up to us to choose this way or that way. It's like two magnets trying to attract you either way.
Yes.
That's how an MRI machine works, and then they want to have spin up, not
Yeah.
spin down for electrons.
Yeah, the MRI works with spin, yeah. So, now you might wonder where I'm going with this, and why am I telling you these things. Because I want to tell you this, because I want to say that even scientifically, you can actually, this passage can verify scientifically very, very well. Because remember when people have left this message because they said, because of the problem of the nature of man, the light, the nature of man, that's what they said. They said that it's their nature who's pushing them to sin, right? Mm-hmm. And they can do nothing about it and stuff like that. And then at the end, God is going to change their nature, right? They're going to, so that's why they won't sin anymore in heaven, but today on earth they have to sin, you know, because that's their nature. That's this doctrine, which is the circumstances and the laws, they lead me inevitably to this conclusion, to this whatever outcome is. And some people are righteous. If you go forward with this, some people are righteous really because of, I don't know, the way that nature works. You know, it's not really their merit, or it's not their merit that are unrighteous. But I want to say, and you might wonder, how would this unpredictability, like this microscopic level, how would this translate to a certain unpredictability at the macroscopic level? Do you understand the question? Like, how would this, what does that have to do with our free will? Because free will, I don't know, maybe it's not the best word, but free will is really unpredictability, right? Because that's what it is. It's unpredictability to a certain degree, really. Because it's interesting that we are quite predictable 95% of the time. Like, you can predict now that I'm not going to go and take that laptop and smash it over the floor. If I would do that, you would be shocked, right? You would predict that I'm gonna continue here, preach, whatever, go and eat with you and stuff like that. We all do things in a certain frame. We could use our free will to do all kinds of crazy things, but we always choose to frame ourselves into this, social structure and be kind of predictable. We like to be predictable with each other. We don't like to be hanging around people which are unpredictable. Really, we think they're crazy.
Psych.
Yeah, or bipolar. Okay, people that are now they're happy and then the next minute they're crazy over you and stuff like that. We don't like that. So we like to be predictable with each other. But how does that go with the free will? Because we still have free will. If we're predictable, how does that go with free will?
You chose it. You chose the predictability.
Yeah, the first thing is you chose the predictability. That's a good one. And the second, I want to get back to draw you something very interesting. And I said this is more of the subject of the nature of man.
It's complicated because even the choice is part of predictability.
Yeah, because that's what I said. When I choose, I want to say.
You are programmed to choose. I don't know.
I would say that maybe it's just my opinion. Take it with a grain of salt. But I say most of the things that you choose, it's not really. You don't really use your free will for most of the things. Because
you choose things that help you survive and help you grow.
It's like right now. When I may be wrong, but right now, no, I just choose, because when you look around you have thousands of decisions you could take every moment, but you only take those that are naturally good for the context that you are, But sometimes there comes a turning point in your life, some point of decision. You have to decide whether to accept or reject the present truth message. You have to decide whether to buy or not to buy this house. You have to decide whether you are going to marry or not going to marry this person or whatever. You have to really make some turning point decisions. Not really talking about whether I'm going to decide to eat or not eat this morning. Of course I'm going to eat. Of course I'm going to, shake your hand when we meet. It's not really that. What free will is, I think, more exercising these kinds of really turning point decisions. And you can say, well, yeah, when you take these small decisions in your life, they influence you and they lead up to the big decision, because Jesus talks about the little things in life, being faithful in the little things. And I want to show you something that might help you understand. So, do you remember the two types of equilibrium I talked to you about? The stable and unstable equilibrium?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, when I want to draw this up there. It's better, because I want to write something on here. Oh no.
You're not gonna have space.
Yeah, I have space for the. So, if I put a ball here, right? This is, let's say I put it in such a way that it stays there. This is an unstable equilibrium. Do you agree with it? Like it's staying there, but just the slightest bit of movement, even an atomic level movement can push it one way or the other. Okay? So then the thing is, I view this as the path you go to heaven. and on each side of the path there are two ditches. And I call these two ditches as fanaticism and formalism. If you start moving in this direction, you will fall into this ditch and you will remain here, because you'll start going, swinging here and there, and this is, I could say this is fanaticism. I don't really know if it matters which way I put one or the other. Why do I call them fanaticism and formalism? Because Ellen White talks about them. Says something like, when Satan cannot introduce formalism in the church, he introduces fanaticism, or something, or maybe the other way. When he cannot introduce fanaticism, he introduces formalism, and they're really the opposite. Like their fanaticism is the opposite of formalism, right? And we have to stay somewhere in between, really, because we don't have to be fanatics and fall on this ditch and fall off the path, but neither do we have to be formalists, right? Like the Pharisees, and fall on the other ditch. So now, do you remember the vision that the first vision of Ellen White with the path going up to heaven?
Mm-hmm.
The first vision?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What did the vision say? There's a path, and the people of God were walking on that path, and there's I don't think it expressly says but there's a ditch on each side of the path. It doesn't say expressly.
Wasn't it that there was a ditch on this side and a wall on this side?
Yeah, steep wall.
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
sure? But that might be the other vision where they're going with, and they're leaving their carts and they're going with the animals.
Oh, I know, the one with the midnight, that's the one, okay.
Let's
I
read
don't
it.
think she expressed that enough.
Yeah, that's why I say I don't think she expressly said that. Let's read it, so we don't get in trouble.
Where are you going for that?
Early writings, huh?
Do you remember where it is? Early writings?
What did you say, sir?
What is it? Early writings?
Just a sec.
Oh.
I think it's 14. 14. While I was praying at the family altar, the Holy Ghost fell upon me, and I seemed to be rising higher and higher, far above the dark world. I turned to look for the Athenian people in the world, but could not find them. Then a voice said to me, "Look again and look a little higher." At this, I raised my eyes, and I saw a straight and narrow path cast up high above the world. On this path, the Athenian people were traveling to the city, which was the farther end of the path. They had a bright light set up behind them, at the beginning of the path, which an angel told me was the midnight cry. This light shone all along the path, and gave light for their feet so that they may not stumble. If they kept their eyes fixed upon Jesus, who was just before them, leading them to the city, they were safe. But soon some grew weary, and said the city was a great way off, and they expected to have entered it before. Then Jesus would encourage them by raising his glorious right arm, and from his arm came a light which waved over the Advent band, and they shouted Hallelujah. Others rashly denied the light behind them and said it was not God that had led them out so far. The light behind them went out, leaving their feet in perfect darkness, and they stumbled and lost sight of the marking of Jesus and fell off the path into the dark and wicked world below. So it doesn't say it's a wall on the other side, on one side, okay? But it says it's high above the earth, okay? So I want to say you can fall off the path in whichever direction you want, because I think it's just a path and it's high above the earth. It's just like a bridge, you know, above the ocean, and you can follow it. I don't want to make a very important point out of this. Anyway, just this is a visual illustration of how I see the things. You know, when God made man, He made man in His own image, and I have a intuition that His own image, what that does that mean is that He gave man free will, because that's what's differentiating us from animals. We have intelligence and free will, not necessarily that we really look like God, you know, like physically. Maybe we do, you know, but that's not the most important point. He gave us free will, okay? And really, you remember, I was talking about the rebellion in heaven, okay? Lucifer rebelled in heaven, and you know, remember when we were discussing about chaos and order, the fact that, you know, Genesis 3:15 was the antidote that God had to chaos. Like He wanted the Genesis 3:15 to say, you know, I want order every generation. I want the seed of Satan and the seed of God separated. But Satan in heaven, he wanted to create chaos. He wanted to go against the plan of God.
Wasn't his argument that there is no actual free will because of the order that God has, that it's a lie?
Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's a good one. So he was. That's where I was going, because actually Satan was, in all his endeavors, he's actually wanting to take the free will away from human beings, or make the willpower, because free will is really willpower. If you are thinking about it, you know, if your willpower is not strong, you won't be able to exercise, like you won't be able to overcome sin, you know, so freely, you know. Or it makes sense if you have a willpower that's very low, and that's what Satan was and is still trying to accomplish in the human race, trying to make the willpower so weak, so that humans, once they fell into a ditch, they're not able to get back on the platform. So, whenever we, do you know, in the study of the nature of man, we have two types of powers, you know, the higher powers and the lower powers, remember? So, what Satan wanted to do is make the lower powers in control of the higher powers, you know, so every time, even though you know it, that you do something wrong, you wouldn't have the willpower to choose not to do it. And most of the people probably on this earth are in this condition. Their lower powers are stronger than their higher powers. And every time you exercise your lower powers, you're destroying your free will, I should say. You're destroying your willpower. Because you are less able to choose to do right. Right? Ellen White says that. Because once you do something wrong, then it becomes easier to do the wrong thing and harder to get back on track. And when you do it again, it becomes even easier to continue on the wrong path. And you're going down to the downward path to perdition, okay? And that path is actually ending up in a place, and you know why? Why do you think she calls the lower passions the animal passions? Because once they are fully in control of you, you're nothing more than an animal, which doesn't have free will, really. That's why you're in bondage, right? Because you're not free. You're not free will. That's why the sin is called a bondage. You're captive to something. You cannot choose. You cannot choose not to smoke, not to eat something, because that has so much power upon you that you are not free anymore. So, I want to make an illustration with this. And I want to say, this is the path. And imagine that this is actually extending like this. It's like this, going towards you and back in that direction. And maybe even making some turns like this, you know. And the ditches and everything, they're just following it, you know. So you're this ball. What you have to do, in my estimation, what you have to do in life is just make sure you stay here. And never ever move 1 inch this direction or 1 inch the other direction. Because if you start moving this direction, it's going to become so harder to get back here. And the more you move here, the more it's going to become harder to move back here. And why is this lower than this? Because this is the lower passions. Really, this is the higher powers over the lower passions. So you have to stay here, okay? And you have to maintain this balance. But once you have fallen here, there's no way you can get back. Can the ball get back here once it's fallen here? Really, it cannot. Can it fall back? Can it go back? Once it's fallen there, you cannot.
Without somebody's help.
Do you know Ellen White in this first vision? She left out some parts. One sentence, it says, it was impossible for those who have fallen to get back on track. It says in
Yeah, we know that.
you know that, right? So that's really true. Like you get here, you're not going back. So I say theoretically you have really no wiggle room. Because theoretically if you move just a very small amount in this direction or in that direction, you are done. You are done. You're just going down on this path. So now there is this, I could use the same illustration to illustrate something else, which is also actually two other things. You know, the lower passions, God gave us the lower passions. Like, they're the passions that help us enjoy life, right? They're the passions that actually make life, not always, but can make life beautiful. Can make you enjoy nature, enjoy the food you eat, enjoy the relationship you have with your husband and your wife, whatever, make you fall in love, which are not wrong things in themselves, okay? So God designed us to be able to enjoy all these things, but how are we able to enjoy them? Because we could say, well, I want to draw here chaos and order. And in my view, the way we have to walk through this journey of balancing the higher and the lower powers is really the same as this one. Because what you do, you can fall down in this path of fanaticism or chaos or lower powers and, you know, have only an emotional experience, which is wrong. Or you could fall on this path, which is formalism or order, and have only an intellectual experience of the truth, which is also wrong. Because that's not what we should do, like not only a theoretical, intellectual experience. What you will have to do is maintain this perfect balance between being enough emotional so that you can enjoy your journey to heaven, so that you can find meaning and it can be fun, you know, to walk with Christ, really. You understand, okay, but still be intellectual and understand the truth and everything else. So I think almost everything really about going to heaven is really about staying in this equilibrium position and not falling into one of these ditches of fanaticism, chaos, or emotions, or formalism, order, and intellectual power. Does this make any sense? Then, another thing that I wanted to express with this model is the free will. That's why we discussed about free will. And this, for me, this is amazing. This model really illustrates our, you know, as I said, just imagine this path, imagine that this drawing has depth in it, and it goes in that direction and in this direction, and sometimes it turns like this and like that, you know, just like a windy mountain road. And when it turns, you don't have to go straight, you have to turn with the road, right? So, what happens if you go straight? You're going to fall in one of the ditches, right? So you have to make sure you follow the path right in front of you. How can you follow the path right in front of you if you don't see it? Well, you have to have the light which is behind you, which is the midnight cry, right? That's what the vision says. You have to have the midnight cry behind you. But what did I say is actually the thing that really brightens our path? Even in the natural world, I said that the knowledge or the understanding of the patterns and the laws of nature helps scientists view into the future, view their path before them, or ahead of them. Sorry, and they're able to see what's going to happen in the future and plan accordingly. So, and they do this by faith, which is understanding or evidence. So, when the people, it makes sense that when the people actually lose their faith in this message, of course they will not be able to see the path ahead of them, because they won't be able to see, right, anything. They don't see the patterns before them. And of course, when the movement is going to turn in one direction and the other, the path is going to be turning, or whatever is going to happen, they're not going to be prepared for it. Okay? So they're going to fall in one direction or the other because they're not able to see forward into the future. So what actually makes you see forward into the future is your faith, which is the understanding of these patterns in the Bible. Okay? So then I wanted to emphasize the nature of free will, because this is really interesting. I said that if you put this ball here, it's really only in one point where it can stay balanced. Otherwise, if you move it, it's gonna fall, and it's gonna be impossible to fall to get back. So if the ball is here, let's say I'll just draw one like this. Is it really free or not? Right? If it's here or there, it's not free, right? So even if he wants to get back, it will never want. But let's say he wants to get back, because there's this thing like, oh, people say, I want to get back to Jesus, but I can't, or something like that. There's no such thing as that. you really don't want to get back. But once you fall there, you cannot get back, right? If the ball is there, it's not free to get back. So, or the same there. But once it's there, the ball is actually free to go in whichever direction it wants to, right? It can go in this direction, in that direction, it can go forward. What's the best thing to do is actually go forward and make sure it doesn't fall in one direction or the other. So you can see here is no free will. This is animal passions. This is the same there, animal passions. No free will. And here you have here free will. It's the only place you can have free will. And even in the, because I asked you the question, how do because we were discussing about the brain and how it works and why it's not predictable. Now, why everything is not actually predictable. And I was giving you an example of the electrons that are random, they cannot be predictable. So I said because there's this randomness inside of you, because you all have electrons, not everything you do is predictable. Some things are just decisions you took there, but I want to say that the only things that are unpredictable are things that happen here, when you are up here. Because when you're here, everything is predictable. When people go off the path, we immediately predict, right? They're going to be lost. It's easy. When people are here, we cannot predict really, right? We cannot really say if you are going to be lost or saved.
Because you still have a choice.
Yeah, you still have a choice. You say, oh, maybe you're going to be saved if you're going to be still staying on the path. So it's not, here it's unpredictable, right? But here it is predictable. You say, well, he's going to stay there, whatever. He's going to be lost and stuff like that. So this thing of predictability, it's very interesting. And if here it's unpredictable, then I want to say that making one of these experiments is really the best way to prove that nature has unpredictability at the macroscopic level. You understand? Like literally making one of these setups, experimental setups, and trying to put a ball there with a robot exactly measuring it, and in a vacuum and everything controlled, blah, blah, blah. And you will see that the ball will move even though nobody is pushing it, because the atoms in the ball, at the microscopic level, they behave unpredictably, and they move and they jiggle around, and even the smallest push of the ball at the microscopic level, if an electron here, down here, decides to push it in this way, and electrons behave unpredictably, it's going to fall in this direction. Okay? Or if it's going to decide to push it this way, also unpredictably, it's going to fall in this direction. So really, you cannot predict in which way it's going to go, physically. So that's why it is very interesting, even physically, if you make this experiment, you can prove that the macroscopic things can have fundamental unpredictability in certain situations. If you put it here, it's predictable. But if you put it here, it's unpredictable. This is very interesting, okay? And this really is the same law as the spiritual law. So what we have to do when we go through this path, in order not to fall from it and not be able to get back, we have to keep our emotions in check, and we have to just make sure we see the patterns that are just before us, or just behind us, and through using these patterns, see the patterns that are before us, and thus our path can be lighted up, and we can use our free will, which we have, to make sure we don't fall in this direction or that direction, and we stay balanced on this message. So this is very important. Okay? Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you have questions on this model? Does it make sense?
Do we want to take a break? Philip, want to do a 15-minute break?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll finish up the next study. And yeah, that's fine. Did I go 2 hours? Oh man, didn't even feel it. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful time together. Please be with us and help us understand deep things of you. Please bless us, everybody, and help us have a balance in our message. Help us not to fall into this ditch that Satan has put on each side. And help us have a wonderful and a beautiful journey with you up to the heavenly city. We thank you for everything in Jesus' name. Amen.
Are you guys